Late last year, as I was restarting my channel, I asked you guys for some questions, some topics to cover. Not unsurprising given I'm a bit of a Breitling guy. A few of you asked about my thoughts on the Breitling takeover, or the Breitling group takeover, if you like, of Universal Geneve. After the intro, let's get into my thoughts on that. Hi, I'm Pete McConville. Welcome to my channel where I overthink, overanalyze, and just geek out on watches far too much. The topic I'm diving into and spending far too much time on today is one that a lot of people have covered, but I think I'm going to do a little bit more analysis than a lot of others have. I've given myself a bit more time, and that is the topic of what is Universal Geneve likely to look like post a Breitling group takeover. So let's get into it. First off, let's talk about how I think this will be positioned. I think that the big question is Universal Geneve going to be positioned kind of below, alongside, or above Breitling? My guess, it will be above. I can't see a case for why it would be positioned alongside Breitling. That makes no sense. And given the way the market is going and how that kind of 1 to 2 to 3,000 Swiss franc market, which is really the one below Breitling, given how badly that one's doing, I'd be shocked if Breitling were going to try and bring Universal Geneve into that space. At the same time, in a lot of their press releases and a lot of the coverage that comes out, there's been a lot of just these little comments along the side reminding us that when Universal Geneve was being sold through retail chains, it came out with Patek, it came out with Jaeger-LeCoultre. So my guess is that that's not so much Patek, but Jaeger-LeCoultre, JLC, is not a bad model for thinking about. An even better model that I've used for a lot of the analysis that's coming is Blancpain. In the same way that Breitling sees itself kind of in the same field, the same area as Omega, or certainly would like to, even if it's not really there, I think that it would like to see Universal Geneve in and around that Blancpain kind of marketplace. Now, what does that mean when the rubber hits the road? What does that mean in dollar terms? Now, I've done some numbers here. If you look at Blancpain and Omega and look at a standard dress watch, a standard diver, and a standard chronograph. A standard dress watch might be something like, for Omega, might be something like a DeVille Prestige. That's going to cost you around about 9,400 Australian dollars. From Blancpain, that'll be something like a Villeray, and that's going to cost you around about 15,600 with a multiple, if you like, of 1.66. If you look at a diver, you're looking at something like a Seamaster 300M, 9850. The equivalent 50 fathoms bathyscaphe is going to cost you around about $21,000. I've used the bathyscaphe, not the 50 fathoms pure, because that kind of has a special place and therefore a special number on it. So I've used the bathyscaphe as more a sort of a, how do I put it, a sort of generic cost for what a Blancpain diver would be. So that gives you a multiple of 2.13. And then a chronograph is something like the Moonwatch. That's going to cost you about 13,000 Australian dollars. Again, I didn't use like the Dark Side of the Moon because they're sort of more boutiquey, more specialized. The 13 grand captures kind of the bog standard. This is what a Speedmaster is going to cost. At the same time, looking at a bog standard Blancpain chronograph, you're looking at the Air Command. That's going to come in at about $30,100 with a multiple of about 2.32. Those multiples are important because we can take those and then look at a what an equivalent Breitling would be, apply those multipliers, and then get some indication of where a universal Geneve watch might sit if you're going to have the same kind of relationship between Breitling and Universal Geneve as Omega has between as Swatch does between Omega and Blancpain. Okay, so now taking those multiples and applying them to kind of Breitling's in the same position, let's see where a Universal Geneve might end up. So you might start with a dress watch. Breitling doesn't have straight up dress watches at the moment. I think they will eventually, but they don't right now. The closest you might get would be the three-hander Navatimers. They're going to cost you around $7,400. Applying our Swatch Group multiplier, that means a Universal Geneve three-hander in steel is likely to cost around about 12,280 Oz dollars. The diver, so think of 42 to 44 millimeter Super Ocean, is about 7,400 in steel on a bracelet. So that would mean the Universal Geneve would come in at, say, 15,700-ish. A chronograph, let's just take you straight up every day, 42 to 44 millimeter Navitimer, that's 13,000 Australian dollars. Applying our Swatch Group multiplier, that means the Universal Geneve chronograph is going to come in at around about $30,100. In each of those cases, it's very similar to a Blancpain, never more expensive, often a little bit less. An interesting comparison is now let's go back to that JLC one we had at the beginning and let's see how those Universal Geneve prices would line up with the equivalent JLCs. So we're talking about a dress watch, a JLC master controller is going to cost you around about 15,400 Australian. So in that case, using my kind of rough maths, a Universal Geneve is going to be $2,500 cheaper. It's going to be about $1,000 cheaper than a Polaris, and it's going to be round about the same price as the Master Control chronograph. Interestingly, from this point of view, the JLC is actually something of a bargain because that Master Control chronograph is in fact also a full calendar. So JLC actually, now that I look at that, that's actually not a bad price. So the Universal Geneve is going to be about the same price as that. Now those are those are all based on 2024 pricing, and we're not going to see Universal Geneve for probably 2 or 3 years. So all of that could go up a couple of K. And also, obviously, this is based on some very broad sort of generic parametrics. But I'd be thinking you're looking at your standard three-hand dress watch coming in at $12,000 to $15,000 from Universal Geneve. I'd be looking at a diver coming in at, call it, $14,000 to $16,000, and I'd be looking at a chronograph coming in at say 28, 29 to maybe 31, 32,000 bucks. All of those are Australian dollars, which is about 2/3 of an American dollar, equal to a Canadian dollar, about 2/3 of a euro. Do your maths from there if you want. Okay, so now let's get on to timing. When are we going to see the next Universal Geneve? From the interviews, it seems as though serious planning for this started about 12 to 24 months ago. The head of design has said in interviews that he has presented and had approved a 10-year model catalog plan for the brand. So if I think, if we imagine that the initial thoughts on the debut watch were started at around about Q3 of 2021, then we have a starting point. So let's assume that, and we also can assume that the owners of Breitling are looking at doing an IPO for the group in around about 27 to 28, and that gives us an end point of when they'll probably want to release their first watch. So my guess is that the first product announcement is likely to be in 2026. Maybe our first product turning up in around about mid 2027. So that would be pushing it, that would be sporty, that would probably have required Breitling to have already started doing some design work. But given everything that we've heard in the interviews, I suspect they have actually started doing that. So, and importantly, that gets a product out. And so that means that it's much more likely that the owners of the Breitling Group are going to be able to leverage the what's coming out of Universal Genève when they go to sell the whole group. Because remember, they invested, call it 80 to 90 million bucks in buying that. They need to be able to show that there's value in that. Okay, so what watch is it that's likely to lead the push? Likely to be the first Universal Genève under this new ownership structure. Universal Genève in their time have made dress watches, sports watches, divers and chronographs. In dress and chronos, they have some iconic pieces that have instant collector cred that don't really need to be explained at all. I think they're going to start with a chronograph, and this is why. Whilst in many ways the pole router is clearly the best known and the most popular and most loved Universal Genève, historically, Universal Genève was actually most noteworthy as a chronograph company. The first reason I think they'll come out with a chronograph is that it creates a golden thread that runs through the whole group. Breitling is primarily known as a chronograph company. That is where the bulk of their history and their R&D and their current expertise is. By going with a chronograph, it signals to the marketplace, it signals to the community that there is a link between these two brands, philosophically, if in no other way. And it gives a degree of unity to the group, but at the same time allows enormous play and isn't really restrictive at all. A chronograph also makes coming in at a relatively high price easier to swallow. You come out with a basic three-hander and off the bat ask for 5 figures for that watch, and it's a tough road to hoe. You've really got to do a lot of explaining. Come out with a chronograph. Come out with maybe a bit high end. Come out with, say, a split-second chronograph, and if you want to put a $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 price tag on that, it's going to make people suck their breath, but they won't actually get too carried away. That's not a terrible price for something like, say, a split-second chronograph, which is well within Breitling's capability at this price range. And finally, because of the history of Universal Genève, the new company can come out with a watch which is going to be an absolute slam dunk winner. The reverse panda, kind of maybe reminiscent of Daytona styling, is a historic look of Universal Genève. You cannot deny their ownership of that look. So they can bring that out with a totally straight face, know it's going to be super popular, and as I said, charge a fair bit for it. So I think we're going to see something like that. Which brings us on to, what is that watch likely to be? A reissue or a modern interpretation of the idea? I think it's going to be a modern interpretation. Universal Genève is not going to be some zombie brand like Nevada Grenchen, just sort of rehashing its old stuff, trying to sell to a few enthusiasts. That's a micro-brand approach. A big company like Universal Genève, like every other big company that's been reborn, is going to be intended to be a high street brand. It's supposed to have boutiques on main roads selling to all sorts of people, not just watch nerds. Universal Genève will have design tools beyond just photocopiers. They will have actual designers capable of producing high quality modern designs, leaning on but not aping older stuff. Of course, sooner or later, UG is going to produce the straight-up re-editions. It's something Breitling has done with great success. It's something every brand is doing with huge success. But I think it's important to see those as the seasoning on the steak for a big brand, not the steak itself. Okay, so now let's talk about movements. Universal Geneve has a history of in-house, has a history of manufacture, and has a history also of just totally brought in third-party movements. Any one of those would be true to whatever it is that you think Universal Geneve is. I suspect that the most likely outcome for this first tranche of watches is going to be what is today often called a manufacture movement. So that'll be a collaboration between Universal Geneve and a larger separate movement maker. And they're going to come up with a version of a caliber specifically for Universal Geneve, but probably based on something they've already got going. A totally third party movement probably just wouldn't fly at this level. But at the same time, remember that we're in a rush. We've got a time frame. We've got to get this watch out. We've only got so much money. So I think that going full in-house would probably require too great an investment and be a little bit too slow to market. And you've also got all sorts of reliability and long-term flexibility issues to deal with. So I think that it's tricky to know where it's going to come from, but I think the next movement will be, as I said, kind of one of these collab manufacture movements. Curiously, whilst Universal Geneve does have a history of manufacture and in-house movements, their history is one of technology, engineering, innovation, not time-honored traditions, craftsmanship, and finishing. I think it's completely unlikely, but an outside runner for this could be something like a development of the Breitling Chronoworks that came out a couple of years ago. So that was, for those of you who aren't aware, basically a Breitling movement, but with the main plates were all made from ceramic, which is so low friction, you didn't need jewels. It had full silicon escapements, had a silicon hairspring, I think, which gave you 100 hours power reserve, which gave you better than COSC certified accuracy. It had virtually everything you could possibly imagine of in the tech required. And it's that movement isn't really matched by any other movement even today. So they could easily go back in time, grab that Chronoworks movement, do some cleaning up, make it a bit smaller, make it a bit thinner. And back in the day, Breitling were trying to sell a $45,000 watch with that movement. That clearly didn't fly, but perhaps Universal Geneve could sell that, albeit at a slightly reduced price, as their own. And I think that would be quite possible. As an absolute wild card, I am not predicting this, but it would be a fascinating power play. It is quite possible that Universal Geneve could actually go all FP Journe on us and come out with a super high-tech, decorated quartz watch. Universal Geneve embraced quartz openly and wholeheartedly before they went broke. I don't think it's going to happen. It's not a prediction, but it could actually be the case that Universal Geneve can be true to their history. And as long as they spend enough money on it, make it look pretty enough and make it do the right things, they could even give us a quartz movement. Okay, so now let's talk about sizing. I'm going to go with what I call small modern sizing. What do I mean by that? Vintage watches were genuinely small, 33 to 34 millimeters for a three-hander, 36 to 37 millimeters for a chronograph were common. These watches are also terrible. They're hard to read, they're difficult to use, they're fragile, they have short power reserves. And by the way, that is not some broad prejudice. That's based on me owning about 50 of them. And they're just... Everyone talks about the size, but they forget the compromises that came with making watches that small. In particular, they're really a 36 to 37 millimeter chronograph is virtually impossible to read. You start throwing new complications in, like an annual calendar, and it becomes a joke. Look at that new Zenith that they've produced in, true to form size. It is utterly unreadable. And I don't think Breitling and Universal Geneve are going to make that mistake. I think we're going to be seeing something around about, if they make a diver, it's going to be around about 38, 39 millimeters. If it's a chrono, it's going to be in the 39 to 41 millimeters. So anyway, they're my thoughts on what I think we're going to get out of a new Breitling owned Universal Geneve. What about you? What are your thoughts? What are you hoping for? And what other questions might you have on this issue that I didn't touch on? Anyway, I've been Pete McConville. If you liked this, do the whole like, subscribe thing. That'd be great. I'd love to have the conversation continue in the comments below, and I will see you later. Bye.